Okay. We're good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chair Durfee. For the record, my name is Rebecca Washburn. I'm the Director of Lands Administration and Recreation with the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. I'm also the chair of the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, one of the many alphabet soups you'll hear about this afternoon. Thank you so much for having me in today. In this invitation and being invited to spend some time with you this afternoon, I have a couple of goals, and I think some of them might actually be rather enjoyable considering the sun's shining outside and we all want to be out there. What I really want to do is help to evoke an image for all of you of what the outdoor recreation economy looks like in Vermont, in your community, in your neighborhood, in the places that you care about. I want to be able to zoom out and talk about why this matters. Why does the outdoor recreation economy matter in Vermont? Talk about the people that care about the most, some of that alphabet soup. Who are the people and the organizations that care about the outdoor recreation economy and are trying to advance it in responsible ways? Share an update on some work that's underway to hear from Vermonters about outdoor recreation, and then fit that into the 3 components that are being proposed through H673. So jumping right in, so long as technology continues to work for me, I have a couple of examples here that are actual real life examples of the ways that the outdoor recreation economy sort of manifests itself or shows up in Vermont, all over Vermont. We're so excited and proud to know that a company like Mavic that's been based in Europe for a bunch of years now lives in Waterbury. They live here because of outdoor recreation. They came here because of the outdoor recreation culture. And what I learned earlier from one of my colleagues, also because of the influencers in outdoor recreation space. So this is a real life example of businesses coming to Vermont because of outdoor recreation. We heard so much from the business owner of the Lamoille Valley Bike Tours when the LVRT was ruined during the July floods. This is a business that was created and is thriving, actually employs my nephew in the town of Johnson. And this wouldn't exist without an asset like the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. Families moving during COVID and deciding they want to stay. The Trail Hub in Randolph that was funded through a grant from VOREC. Burton employees that are actually starting their own companies and based here in Vermont instead of going to other places further afield. And one of my favorite stories, the idea of an adaptive athlete that actually gets to visit Vermont because of the resources that Vermont provides to them. So there are a lot of different ways that the outdoor rec economy that we talk about a lot for those of us that are spending our days thinking and talking about it, it shows up in real life examples of the people that you know, the neighbors that you have, the people you see at the grocery store. These are just some of the ways that I was hoping that examples could evoke an image for you. And then the chart on the side is really interesting. Headwaters Economics put together some data around what it looks like with communities that are looking at in-migration and out-migration, and those that have recreation-based economy are seeing more in-migration, and in the case of rural areas, less out-migration. And I think a couple of things you'll be hearing about later this afternoon, both from me and from folks from the Trails and Greenways Council and their constituents, is we can move that 1.3 number, the one in the rural area, if we look at the economic impacts of outdoor recreation in our state and understand where there are gaps and opportunities, that number can move. So just a precursor to some of the different ways that an economic impact study could be beneficial.
Could you explain it a little better?
Yes.
I'm just kind of not sure what's going on here.
So it's county-based data.
Okay.
It's not town-based because, you know, we have to be unique. We're Vermont. A lot of other places track their population information by county. And what this is showing is that a place where there is a strong recreation-based economy, so their GDP, a good proportion of it is supported by outdoor recreation products and services, is seeing more people move there as a result of that outdoor recreation, or just in general. There are more people moving to places where outdoor recreation is a large component of their economy than the places that don't have a high percentage of the outdoor or their GDP being supplied by outdoor recreation businesses.
So how is that reflected in the graph? Is orange meaning people come?
Yes.
Okay,
Orange means people coming in an outdoor recreation based economy. Gray means people coming in non-recreation based economy. So you can see in the medium cities and the rural places, the number is actually negative. It means that outmigration is happening at a greater rate than people moving to those areas as a result of outdoor recreation based economies. And this is going to become more interesting when I share some of the statistics about Vermont with you, which is actually the next slide.
I'm wondering whether Vermont's 14 counties are all classified here as rural, or are they spread out?
That's something that I can follow up on. I don't have the specific statistics around what they classify as a medium city, but I would guess that you're correct, that we would be classified as all rural. For the most part, when we're looking at federal data, Burlington, it barely squeaks into some of our urban programs that we have access to federal funding for. So I would guess maybe Burlington would classify, but otherwise that's it.
And this is, what's migration as far as people coming to live there, right? Not
Yes.
visitors.
Not visitors. This is actual like relocation. Mhm. No, these are great questions.
So Becca, just for clarification, these don't represent three segments of Vermont. These are national.
These are
So
national statistics.
Los Angeles,
Yeah.
Chicago.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Thank you for that
Because
clarification.
otherwise, Waterbury's got a lot going on.
Yeah, yeah.
So does Lindenville.
Mhm.
you know.
And I think what I like most about this graphic is the ability to show that through economic analysis, understanding where spending is happening, where businesses are moving, where some of this activity is happening, we know where we could attribute that type of growth as it relates to Vermont. We don't know that right now, but we could better understand what that number represents for the state of Vermont if we did that kind of study. And we could look at ways to move that number so that it's moving up more than it would be if we didn't understand it as well as we could. So those are great questions to help kind of get the point across of why I think this graph is really interesting for us. Here's another one. Last year, when I came in and provided testimony, we had just recently received the 2021 data. The Bureau of Economic Analysis studies this on an annual basis. They release their statistics in the fall. Last year, we were third in the nation on the percent of the outdoor recreation economy contributing to our gross domestic product. We are now second. We moved ahead of Montana, and we're only led by the state of Hawaii. So the percent of Vermont's gross domestic product, the products and services that are created and sold in the state of Vermont, 4.6% of them go towards or are from outdoor recreation. And that's the second highest percent in the country. So Hawaii is the only other state that has a higher percent of their GDP being derived from outdoor recreation products and services. That's really big. We went up 0.5% from last year, which is not insignificant. It's to the tune of, why didn't I put the number down here of how many million? Can you whisper it to me, Jackie?
Mhm.
$1.5 billion. That's
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B. $1.5 billion. So this is really exciting for us. The other really significant increase, and one that I think is all on our minds, is this idea of job creation and outdoor recreation. Not only is it having this kind of impact on our state's economy, it's also creating jobs in places where we're losing jobs in certain sectors, we're gaining jobs here. So these are really exciting statistics when you think about all of the different ways that Vermont needs to generate revenue in order to take care of the people that live here. That outdoor recreation is helping do that. So this is really exciting to me.
What constitutes outdoor recreation?
Yeah.
And let me just throw in a few maybes, like what
Mhm.
about farm stay? What about food,
Mhm.
tourism?
Yeah.
Are these all outdoor recreation?
Yeah, so this is really interesting and it's getting into the weeds. I could spend all afternoon with you talking about this. There's something called NAICS codes, and I'm not going to be able to get the acronym right for you, but every business has to attribute what they do to a particular federal code. And what the Bureau of Economic Analysis does is they decide what they think is outdoor recreation. And they say that code, and that code is all contributing to outdoor recreation. So it could be agritourism, it could be guiding business, it could be lodging, it could be a lot of different things because it's defined very broadly right now. There aren't any NAICS codes that are just outdoor recreation that you could just pick that one off the list.
Thank you.
But it's one of those things, you know, when you see it, and a lot of people are seeing the benefit of being attributed to outdoor recreation. Like when the floods occurred in July and Jamaica State Park was closed, the general store in town, so they lost a ton of business to the tune of, you know, $15,000 to $20,000 worth of business for the couple of weeks that the park was closed.
Mm.
So they could say that they're a business that is affected by and contributes to outdoor recreation because they're part of that ecosystem. Great questions. I'm going to keep moving here. So who cares about this? Who's doing anything about this? I think this is kind of like a three-legged stool, and it's not one that is dissimilar from a lot of other important issues and initiatives that you're probably hearing from constituents about. It's a public-private nonprofit partnership, and the Forest Parks and Recreation Department, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development are part of that most inner circle of the concentric circles of entities and ecosystems that are caring about and thinking about this. And then we have the Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance, who you'll be hearing from after I wrap up testimony, as well as the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. I put these names up on the slide in particular because when I watched the testimony from when this bill was introduced, I heard a lot of questions about who's working in this space, who cares, who's doing what. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what this looks like. There are industry representatives, there are business owners, there are nonprofit organizations. There are a lot more organizations and individuals involved in what it means to advance the outdoor recreation economy responsibly. But this is a core group of partners that are thinking and talking about it together. And I think one of the different ways this has shown up, and it's a group that you are hearing from, it's the one that I chair. This was an executive order from the governor back in 2017 to establish the Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative. The whole purpose behind this is to create a steering committee that follows a collective impact model that really draws on all of the different existing organizations and entities that care about this work, this mission, and have a role to play in advancing outdoor recreation on behalf of Vermonters. So I think it's really interesting to know that us, Vermont, in amongst other states across the country, are recognizing the value in bringing together the stewardship organizations and the stewardship entities with the business entities, the tourism entities, to really think about where's the cross section between our work and how do we benefit from taking that cross section, looking at points of conflict or points of opportunity and tackling it head on. And that's what the Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative does. And it uses the skills and knowledge and experiences of the different people that participate in outdoor recreation and the outdoor rec economy to understand where those points of tension or gaps or needs might be and how to advance those. VOREC, when it was first established, essentially created themes around the work of the outdoor recreation economy. This is just one way of representing that. There was a recognition at the beginning that we needed to add promoting and enjoying the health and wellness benefits of outdoor recreation. That was not part of the original charge. But just as a quick snapshot of the different ways that this group of stakeholders has attempted to understand and sort of categorize the different sectors that advance outdoor recreation. So not ignoring that there's an important focus on the quality of outdoor recreation resources and the stewardship necessary to maintain that network of trails and other assets, and the businesses that bring people and revenue and opportunity to the state. So there's a lot baked into these 5 pillars, but just as a way to sort of paint a picture of who we are, what we do, this, I think, represents a pretty good illustration of that.
I just have a quick question. Do you guys allow for any income sensitivity for to allow all Vermonters to participate in outdoor activities?
I think that's an important component of why we are spending as much time. The next slide's going to go into a planning process that the Recreation Economic Collaborative in our department are
Okay.
collaborating on. And that's one of the explicit purposes, was to really broaden the input we're getting about outdoor recreation, to include those that I grew up, my dad needed to work at the ski resort in order for me to learn how to ski. So I completely understand the experience of needing that leg up. So we're paying attention to that. And I think that's a really good question. So Move Forward Together Vermont is a planning effort that's currently underway right now. As I mentioned, the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation and the Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative are working together. So another acronym, I apologize. The Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. It's called SCORP. This is something that we have to update every 5 years in order to be eligible for federal funding that we can grant to communities for nonprofit communities for outdoor recreation development. We have to update that every 5 years. We're using that opportunity to expand, go bigger and broader, and hear from Vermonters about what their vision for outdoor recreation is and what our priorities should be for the next 5 years. So we're gathering input. We've created a couple of different stakeholder groups that are helping us think this through. We'll be setting up a vision and set of priorities in May, and we'll be going out for public input. One of the things that I love most, and I couldn't show this on the slide, is the list of different groups that we're seeking to hear from through focus groups. We have more than 30 focus groups happening, from veterans, the BIPOC community, low income, seniors, conservation groups, town-based recreation organizations, the Department of Health, agriculture and agritourism, the Vermont Traditions Coalition, schools, so many different entities that we're seeking to hear from, so that this vision and priorities can be representative of all Vermonters. We made a deliberate effort through designing this process to say, do you like to get outdoors? Do you like to be outside? Not, do you see yourself as a recreationist? We don't want to be thinking about only those people that show up on the cover of an LL Bean catalog. We're thinking about everybody that wants to be outside. So we'll be completing this process through next fall. And that's where I think this timeline, coupled with some of the components that exist in H673, are really meaningful. This is really, sort of broader, bigger context, the economy, why we care about it, who's paying attention to it, what we're doing in our work together to hear from Vermonters, so that the vision and priorities are their vision and priorities, and what comes from the different proposals included in H673 are responding to what Vermonters need. Any questions before I jump into the three components of the bill? All right. So with the with the economic impact study, let me just flip to my notes so I make sure I don't miss anything. You've seen in the bill what it proposes to accomplish. And I think, a couple of different ways of demystifying this is thinking, again, going back to the beginning of my presentation, if we have the statewide statistics around the $1.5 billion that is being generated in the state of Vermont that's going towards our GDP, where's that coming from? Where are those 15,000 jobs? Where is that spending happening and where is it not? This study is what would allow us to do that. I think about hearing from constituents like folks from the town of Poultney, where we've made some investments. They're saying we don't understand what the economic activity is in our part of the state, but we know that we can use data and information to better capitalize on that. So there are examples of ways that at a statewide level, this will be really helpful for us. Legislatively, you can direct investments in ways that are more impactful. Municipalities have the ability to understand and make investments, even consider changes to zoning and their municipal plans in ways that help advocate for changes that leverage what we know to be a very strong component of the state's economy.
Representative Levitt, any question?
No, I just have a question. So about how we're looking at the money.
Mhm.
In the off session, I work at Heroes Welcome.
Oh, nice.
You know, it is what it is, but it's fine. But they do a lot of outdoor rentals.
Yeah.
They have boats, they have gas. What part of their overall contribution to the state are you looking at when you consider
Mhm.
what part of their revenue is outdoor activity?
Mhm.
Would it be all of it? Because it does list itself as we do outdoor stuff, but so much of their revenue isn't from that.
Yeah.
It's from, honestly, it's from making 700 sandwiches a day.
That are really good, by the
I know,
way.
aren't they? I order the books, I don't make the sandwiches. But so I'm just wondering how, what's the word I'm looking for? How how classified, not
Yeah.
classified,
Is it
but
their
broken up.
gross, is it their gross revenue for the year that's going towards this figure, or
Right.
is it some subset of that?
Yeah,
I can't answer that specifically for this particular business, but again, it goes back to the NAICS codes that I was describing, and if the way the business is using those NAICS codes is contributing to how they're reporting their income. You may be able to get more information from some of the witnesses that I know are providing testimony later on this afternoon. If not, I can come back with more specifics.
I'm just curious if the NAICS codes, and I don't mean to be a stickler, but are overinflating what the outdoor economy actually is, because it's combining, the Flying Pig Bookstore could say, we do outdoor stuff because we have a porch that people can sit on and they can read.
Right.
But that contributes nothing to the revenue of the store.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, are we comparing apples to apples or oranges to fat-wheeled bikes?
And I think when you look at it from a national perspective, we are able to compare apples to apples because they're using the same ways of measuring economic impact for outdoor recreation. But it's correct. When you start drilling into the details, they are more broad. Because you can't say a farm is a farm, it has one code that is defined as farm. Outdoor recreation is so much more than being able to be defined by one thing, that I
Right.
think you're getting at some of the point. But on the flip side, we know just by traveling around the state that it would be very difficult to separate outdoor recreation and being outside from the economy of the state of Vermont. So what we know these statistics from the Bureau of Economic Analysis are doing for us is saying, pay attention to this. You're second in the nation. And then what we can do with an economic impact study is say, what does this actually mean? How much of this is general stores and bookstores and guide shops and this and ski resorts? We can start to do a little bit more of that so that we know what should we be paying attention to? Where can we make a difference? Where should these investments be made at the local level and at the statewide level? So I think you're getting right at the
Okay.
purpose and point and the benefit that we would see from doing something like this, a study like this.
A
And
couple other questions.
oh, yeah,
here.
sure.
Thank you. Becca, let's use an example like Vail Resorts, which is based in Bloomfield, Colorado, but owns Stone Mountain Resort,
Right.
Okemo Mountain, Mount Snow. No matter where you buy a ticket, you're buying it out of Bloomfield or Seats and Pass. How do they measure, or you measure, how much is really Vermont-based
Mhm.
of their gross?
They have a responsibility to be able to say how much of that revenue is being realized at Stowe Mountain Resort. So there's a calculation happening behind the scenes that allows them to report income based on usage. I went there on Sunday, I rode the lift, I generated a certain dollar figure for my trip up the
And they
lift.
share that with the Vermont Tax Department or FPR, or how?
You're getting into like two different ways that the department or the state interacts with the resort. We lease land to them and they have to pay us a fee every year, but then there's also, like you said, they have to report revenue to the tax department. My assumption is that they're using the way that they attribute value of their revenue to the state of Vermont. They're using that same calculation that we understand to be how they generate the fee for us each year. So that's a good example, but it's a complicated one. Yeah.
It is common.
Yeah, this level of detail, I mean, maybe you'll want to come back and share
Happy to.
after you've dug into it. And I think that there may be an interest in the Commerce Committee and having a look at the bill too. So they would probably be asking
Terrific.
exactly these kinds of questions.
Mhm. That's great.
Mike, did you have a question?
I'm okay.
One of the things I wanted to say before moving on, because in listening to the introduction and the read through with legislative counsel, I know there were questions about, where else is this happening? Are there examples of this? And in the state of Vermont, this would be the first time this has happened. So this is a first time effort if we were to conduct an economic impact study for outdoor recreation. And there are other states, as I mentioned earlier, there are outdoor recreation economy offices across the country. We were one of the first, which is exciting. But there are other states that are commissioning economic impact studies that are costing anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000. So we did a little bit of ground truthing and understanding like, okay, they're asking, what's this price tag? So we did a little bit of work and looked to examples from other states to make sure that we weren't off base, and have requests for proposals and some other things that we could share more details with if there's an interest. But this is certainly something that we've shared with the Trails and Greenways Council so that they're prepared as they think about how to talk about the impacts and the opportunity that this study could demonstrate. Moving on to the Trails and Greenways Council, again, just to dig deeper into the key partners that our department works with, and one from whom you're going to hear quite a bit from this afternoon, and have in the past. The council is one of the organizations that we have a long-running history with. It's a nonprofit that basically serves as an advocate and a technical resource for the recreation community. I've worked for the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation on and off for a long time, let's just say. And I have seen the Trails and Greenways Council ebb and flow in their ability to engage and be that voice for outdoor recreation. And it's always been because of an amazing board chair or a volunteer from another recreation organization that is putting in a tremendous amount of time and energy at the support of that nonprofit that they work for, or from their own family's pocket. And I think you have that in Nick Bennett. You'll be hearing from him later this afternoon. He's one of those board chairs. And I think what we have seen through the investment, we provided some seed funding. We, the Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, provided seed funding to establish a position part-time at the Trails and Greenways Council. And I can say that our relationship and the work that we're doing with the council right now is the best that it's ever been. It's really exciting to see that the recreation community has that voice now. It is representative of the broad swath of people that are responsible for making sure that the trails that you visit are well taken care of, are safe, are accessible to the types of people that are interested in taking part in that. And I can't underscore enough that I think an investment in this organization is an investment in one of the legs of the stool that our outdoor recreation economy depends upon. If we don't have an organization like this that's helping support a newly formed recreation nonprofit, an all-volunteer conservation commission, you name it, they're all responding to the interest to develop assets, recreational assets at the community level. And the council is there to help think about what are the needs of those groups? How can we make sure that the work they're doing, the opportunities they're creating for outdoor recreation are safe, they're sustainable, they're responsibly designed and built? This is the organization that's helping to do that. And we're seeing with the part-time staff that has been brought on board and has been working in that capacity for several months now is already showing the benefits of what it means to have professional capacity. That ebb and flow that occurs with the dedication and bandwidth and frankly, the lack of burnout from volunteers gets leveled out when we have paid staff that are dedicated to this. And I think the recreation community deserves to have a staff person that can do that. Lastly, best management practices is another component of H673. It felt like it would be worthwhile just to spend a minute, take a step back and think, well, what are these? What are best management practices? We know about AMPs when we think about forestry. Best management practices help inform the design, construction, and management of trails. And I think in particular, their focus is making sure that those experiences are developed in ways that mitigate impacts to the environment and are mindful of the infrastructure that getting to that trailhead depends upon. Anytime you hear from Abby Long at Kingdom Trails, you hear about that. These are really important for people that are providing recreational opportunities to any community. And I think it's important to know that, you know, we aren't operating in the Wild West right now. There are best management practices out there. The Forest Service has them. The International Mountain Bike Association has them. If you're building ADA trails, accessible trails, you have universal standards that you can follow. But if you were an individual, even if you went and Googled trail standards right now, it would be overwhelming to see all of the different resources that are available to you. And where's the point of entry? Where's the point of access? It really isn't very clear right now. And if I think about in my town of Middlesex, the Trails Committee, the Trails Committee that is thinking about the Chases Mountain Trail and how to care for that, I want them to have a set of best management practices that are accessible to volunteers that don't do this as professionals. And we don't have that right now. And I think having that will allow them to be more accessible to a wide range of recreation trail providers. And it'll allow us to increase the application of these kinds of standards and adherence to them. So we're talking about better built and maintained trails, better designed trails in places where the growth in outdoor recreation and interest in outdoor recreation is exploding. So more than ever, paying attention to the need for us to be considering sustainability is responsible for us to be doing at the same time that we're considering ways to advance the outdoor recreation economy and invest in those technical resources that recreation organizations need through the Trails and Greenways Council. So with that, I think that is all I had to offer, but I recognize there might be a lot of questions.
Go ahead, Dave.
So the same sort of teasing out the facts.
Mhm.
I'm wondering what portion of the $1.5 billion recreational economy depends on trail maintenance, because that's a big part of this bill.
One of the components of the study would look at exactly that. It would look at what are the contributions to that percent, that number that come from different recreation types and from different land ownership
Okay.
types.
Sorry if you've already covered that.
No, I didn't. I
Oh,
think that
okay.
was a terrific question.
Okay.
Very much so.
So how, I'm reading the bill here, this is the study section, how the economic impacts are distributed across recreational activities.
That's exactly
it.
Okay. Okay.
So be able to know more snow sports versus mountain biking versus hiking, fishing, hunting, snowmobiling. Yeah.
Representative O'Brien, did you?
I just wondered, getting back to what Josie and they were asking, with these groups like VORAC and the Green Trails and Greenways, are you reaching out to all the other potential players in this outdoor economy? So like we're talking about, you know, like the food industry, the housing industry, because they're obviously a part of that, or
Yes.
general stores. And how that, you know, it's like when you look at the makeup of these groups, it's like we all say, oh, that is the outdoor economy, but because it's so much more, how do you fold those in going forward?
So a couple of different ways of answering your question. The Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, the steering committee that I described, I'm the chair. The vice chair is the commissioner of the Department of Tourism, and she is there as a representative of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So intending to draw in some of those other components from the housing sector, from tourism, marketing, economic development. And then through the Move Forward Together Vermont process, that is really looking at establishing a set of priorities and a vision for outdoor recreation. Agriculture is one of the main components of the stakeholder groups that we've been interested in hearing from, knowing that it's very difficult when you're enjoying the outdoors to distinguish between an experience at a farm festival in the fall versus where you're going through the corn maze versus time in the forest on a trail. Like as a visitor to Vermont, as a person that loves a rural culture and a rural landscape, you're probably going to take part in both of them, and you're feeling like you're recreating outside. So we've definitely taken that into consideration and are inclusive of all of those experiences. Great question.
I've got a list in front of me from our agenda that has Nick at the top of it for next speakers. I don't see Nick.
He's out in the.
Is he waiting?
Mhm.
Okay, well, then,
He didn't want to exceed your capacity for the room, so
okay.
he's generously waiting
Now
outside.
Now here it is.
With that, I'll wrap up
Thank
then.
you very much.
Thank you so much.
We're 4 over now.
Whatever.
Counting. Yeah,
I'm gonna watch him.
I have like a lounge for people who want.
So we do have a capacity level. That's what we're talking about here in the room. And I'm wondering whether folks who are not on the speaking list here, so you know who you are. And I'm sorry that we can't accommodate everybody. You can tune out on YouTube.
He's actually gonna kick us off. Sure, shit.
Like a
She
lab.
just stepped outside.
He's just on the way.
Do you have Becca's computer?
I do not. I'm on the Zoom though. I don't know if that will let us speak. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Wait, ours is leaving.
There you go.
And we can pull up a second chair if you'd like, if you're co-present.
Other two.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off. First off, thank you for having us in today. We're excited to talk a little bit about H673. For the record, I'm Nick Bennett. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Mountain Bike Association. I'm also the co-chair of the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council.
Tommy O'Connor. I'm the executive director of the Vermont ATV Sportsmen's Association and recently named to the board of the Vermont Trails and Greenway Council.
And you're gonna
I'll kick us off, yeah. So information here today, again, relates to the Vermont Trails and Greenway Council and our thoughts related to H673 and all the other amazing work that comes out of all of this. So quick background, there are just over 8,000 miles of publicly accessed trails across the state. The biggest component of all that we really pride ourselves on is that just over 70% is hosted by private land ownership, meaning our amazing community members and folks here in Vermont sharing their land with us to utilize in many different facets. We have a lot of work around conservation as well in this regard. Then on to the next part, that nonprofit stewardship organizations such as ourselves, really pride ourselves on not only offering recreation, but of course, how do we take care of the environment, conserve it so that we can have it for years to come and generations to come. And I know Becca was starting to talk about this a lot in her testimony, but the diverse outdoor recreation businesses that are here, some people do think right away, yes, places that you rent your either canoes or your boats from, or where you can go and do things, but we have dealerships, we have clothing lines, we have other organizations such as that. And then in the ATV world, one of the things we really talk about is we have a lot of these mom and pop shops that are the delis and the gas stations where people frequently go because that's where they're most comfortable. But also some of them have been built right on the trailhead for that purpose. So we do a lot of communication that way. And I know other organizations are in the same boat. The recreation-oriented communities, I think of Kingdom Trails a lot with Abby and that group. But you think of a lot of folks have their favorite trail network, and that's where they want to be, and they create a lot of communities around that. I also live locally in Jeffersonville, another mountain biking area, and the landowners there do fantastic work to support that whole thing. So it's really important to see that recreation not only drives people to come here, but it does create a sense of belonging for so many people that are here and that visit. So the final bullet point I know Becca brought up, but we also love to highlight is the GDP stat, being that we're only second place in Hawaii where recreation ranks. I think that's a really important thing. It says a lot about Vermont and why people choose to come here. I'm a transplant myself that came from recreation opportunities and stayed and studied recreation in college. So I'm from Connecticut originally, came here to go to school and have stayed. And so that's really important to all of us. A little bit more here about the Vermont Trails and Greenway Council. The logos you see are a series of groups that are part of our organization. And we represent a little over 50,000 individual members, people who are trail network users, as well as looking at over 100,000 volunteer hours through that set of people. Volunteer hours look as simple as going out and maintaining trails, cleaning them up, to several of our organizations have ambassador style programs, meaning they're on trail networks helping folks who have never used it before how to utilize either map features, places to go, highlights. And they also tend to be your great community ambassadors of here's the greatest place to go get a good sandwich, or here's the place you need to go if you need X, Y, or Z. So those volunteer hours turn into so much more. The about 8,000 miles of trail, again, we bring up, that's the statewide usage of all of our networks. So ATV, snowmobiles, hiking, mountain biking, so forth. The 50,000 jobs statewide is looking at, of course, our organizations that have staff, but then also to Becca's point, the organizations that are from recreation businesses that are doing the rentals, the providing of guided services in some places, things like that, which is another great economic impact here for the state, providing work for folks. The steward trails on the private land, really the big piece there is when we work with our private landowners, there's a lot of discussion on how do we do this properly, how do we maintain it, so not only is it safe to use, it's able to be used time over time, but when they are either looking to move on from their property and bring in new ownership, there's some pride there that we have groups of people that are really dedicated to taking care of the area that they're utilizing. And in my case recently, I just came on in June to my organization, but that was one of the first conversations we had. We had a longtime landowner that was moving on, and new one came in and was psyched to hear from the realtor that was a very huge point of there's a great trail network that goes right through there. They take great care of it. They love their landowners, and that helps sell that property quite quickly. So that was a really positive thing in my mind. And of course, we have state and federal agencies that we work with to take care of all that. Some of that relates to the BMP discussion I know Becca started to bring up, and that we're also focused on, because all of us have either partner agencies or parent agencies that tell us how we need to do certain things. My trail networks have to be maintained and looked at differently than Nick's in the mountain bike world to motorized. But what we have is these standards that we must practice. And really important to us, our trails person does go to yearly professional development to make sure that the stewardship is there, the conservation work is there, and they're doing things properly. And VTG supports that as well. So anytime we get together, we share these professional development opportunities and ways to grow. Talking just about stewardship being really important. That's something that I think trail networks, sometimes people just think, oh, they're out there to have a good time and enjoy. That's true. But the other part is if we don't have them, we lose them. And also we care so much about the environment because we know environmental changes are happening. And if we do not take care of these networks, we lose them. And that's the most unfortunate thing. So with the bullet points here, we want to utilize Vermont's landscape. That's the most important thing. When you hear people who talk about their experiences here, they usually talk, oh, we went to this outlook, or we were on Lake Champlain, or we were in this particular area. They usually talk about something they're visually seeing versus something they're actually doing. And so that's a really important way we approach stewardship, is how do we make sure that that's something 10 years down the road, 100 years down the road, that that's still the same experience someone's going to be able to access. The BMPs, again, as you have been hearing several times, the trail design, construction, use, and maintenance. The emphasis there again is that this is not just us going out, cutting trails and making it how we want. There's a lot of planning that goes into that. Our trails coordinator here at VASA does on average about a month of prep work before he goes anywhere near a trail network, because it's looking at making sure we're not crossing into any type of watershed issues. Are we going near any high erosion areas? What needs to be thought about on getting there? Never mind, just because you have a trail doesn't mean you can put it in, because you have to have trailheads and safe places to park and unload, etc. Going down a few more bullet points here, the volunteer supported work is another point of emphasis, as we mentioned, because so many of these trail networks operate with the support of membership or local communities, and they create, again, that sense of community. So not only do we have recreation communities, the folks that are actually doing the activity, but we have communities of folks that are so dedicated to making sure that places are clean, making sure places are safe, that they're going out and doing volunteer days. I know so many organizations you'll hear when their seasons particularly start up the weekends before, you hear large work parties blasting it out on social media saying, hey, we're all getting together at this trailhead. We're going to do some work. Grab your rakes, grab anything you can so we can clean it up, make it look nice. And then throughout our seasons, in our case, the summer seasons, we hear constantly, they're like, hey, this is a great time. Let's all get out and do the work. And that also came up after the July floods. We had a lot of our volunteers and a lot of our folks going out, telling us, doing trail assessments, damage assessments, but then getting right to work and cleaning what they could to try to get networks back open, because they understood the impact that that had. And last bullet there, the funding work that we get is through those memberships. So people paying for their either access to ride certain trails or be a part of the organizations. All of us do a lot of grant work. We reach out to several different organizations, both federally and state funding, and the grants help us in a lot of different ways. We utilize it primarily in our sense for trails and doing specific work that also partners most recently with like the National Forest Foundation or FPR and their RTP projects. So those relationships are really important, because if we were having to fund it all on our own, it would not be feasible. So getting these grants to do all this great trail work is so beneficial. And then the philanthropic support, you know, we run into folks who have the ability to do some extra financial donations and support with us because they like the work we do. Or even in the case this morning at my office, we had a gentleman who's coming up from Connecticut and was just so amazed at the ability that one of our Southern Trail work had about the ambassador program and how comfortable he was. He did an additional donation on top of his just general trail access decal. And so seeing things like that show us that our trail networks are important to our local communities in that regard. But when people see the benefit, they're willing to try to do some extra financial support. We obviously have lots of different challenges in our recreation trails. The limited understanding of our outdoor recreation economy is where the study comes in. We have ideas in so many almost siloed areas. You know, I know what kind of money comes in and out, but that's to our organization. I don't know necessarily the specifics on the gas station at the trailhead. You know, are they seeing, you know, they can tell us when the July floods hit, like we are in so much need to get these trail networks open. How can we help you? So we know they're struggling, and we don't know that impact until it obviously happens sometime. So we really want to get that strong understanding of what this recreation economy here in Vermont is getting, not only from people just showing up and participating, but what are they doing in the towns? What other activities are part of this that drew them there? Deferred maintenance refers to when we have projects or maintenance or updates we need to do that unfortunately either can't be done right away for whatever reasons. And deferred maintenance, a couple of slides later, you'll see, but many of us report up to $1 million a year in deferred maintenance. And that is just a series of issues that either keeps trail networks closed or unable to be used. And sometimes, unfortunately, when they're not safe, obviously we have to shut them down and get them fixed. And sometimes that comes with labor shortages or material shortages, things along those lines, which we'll cover in the next slide as well. And throughout all of this, as you can see, a lot of these are challenges that are universal. This is not specific to one network. This is not anything that one person sees more than the other. So that's really important to us. The dramatic increase in demand is we're seeing more and more people coming here to Vermont to recreate, which is a great thing. That's very beneficial. And hopefully, in my mind, more people like myself that come, enjoyed it, and choose to stay and make roots here. That's really important. I know Becca also mentioned a few folks that look to constantly come here now as their primary vacation spot and be part of that tourism piece. That's really important too. We're hearing several folks recently that are picking this state because they enjoyed their trail experience, whatever it may be. And of course, we have climate change, we have varying issues around all of that. And we saw the July floods, the December ones. We're also seeing other places outside of Vermont that have connections to us, either material wise or folks not being able to come to us because they're dealing with their own personal effects. So climate change is not just here in Vermont, but what it's doing to our guests that are going to be joining us. A little bit on our growth, some really important numbers here. The demand for the outdoor recreation has accelerated primarily through the pandemic. We learned in the pandemic, it's great to be outside and it's healthy to get your sunshine. So we saw a lot of people coming to Vermont to do that because you can't really do that in a lot of, really strong urban areas. And so that did draw a lot of folks here. The stat here, the 54% of Americans that recreated in 2021 has increased every year since 2014. So what we're looking at too is if half of the Americans are out recreating, we know they're also leaving some areas to go to specific recreation spots in Vermont, as we've seen as one of those very popular places. The trail usage has also gone up. As you can see, that's a large percentage. That's 100 to 200% in our motorized and non-motorized seasons. Looking at that growth, some of that, again, is pandemic push because of the abilities they were able to be out and recreate, and you're not stuck in tiny groups and tiny spaces. So that was very beneficial for all of us. And on that last bullet point, you see that the recreational trails that are hosted by landowners, we just have to keep emphasizing that it's our community members, it's our folks that live here that are really helping support our trail networks. And that's who we're also really helping in the end. Some people have told us in all of our forums that they buy a place because they can just go out their backyard and either jump on that mountain bike trail, or snowmobilers that can leave the driveway and they're on a trail and don't have to haul anywhere and trailer up and do all those important things. So a little bit here on our benefits of outdoor recreation. There's significant amount of studies out there that you can find that talk about its personal health and emotional health and well-being. That's something that's obviously really important this day and age, that covers not just recreation, but our health system that we know we need to work particularly with youth. The resilient communities, again, we'll bring up is these communities really depend on a lot of our networks being there. I can think of a couple of places, that I've gone that, again, those mom and pop shops, deli shops, when you sit there and talk to them, that's all they talk about. We talked to this person who's visiting from New Hampshire, and we showed them all the really cool places to go. And they're really excited. They have a very strong investment in being part of that community. The ecological awareness and conservation is something that's always on our mind, as we mentioned with our stewardship. But what also can happen is all these ambassador programs or these educational programs that all of us try to do bring that ecological awareness as well. So we're trying to teach people, again, this is how you can be part of a conservation effort and a stewardship while still utilizing the environmental space that you're in. We have these great outdoor businesses, again, we keep bringing up, but they're also very good at educating. I know, particularly being a person who also enjoys water sports, in that they'll tell me, hey, keep clear of this area. They're doing some type of vegetation regrow. They're like the perfect map people because they'll tell you what to avoid, where not to go. And that's really helpful because that keeps those areas either in their ability to regenerate and regrow, or keep them as, pristine as we enjoy them. The attraction, retention of new residents, we've talked about a lot. I get to be the poster child for that. I came here for that exact reason, as did the rest of my family. So that's really important to all of us. The infrastructure and amenities, that's those other things that I know Becca was also highlighting. These areas such as our hotels, our bed and breakfasts, our restaurants, our gas stations, all these places that also get business when we have people that come to the state. Some people, as we know, also in our realm tell us we pick a certain campground. So bring the trailer up, bring the whole family up, and we summer here. We also know that remote work has become quite popular. So we've even heard of families that are remotely relocating here and able to ride on their trail networks and then go back to their camper, work in their office, if you will, and take care of things. And that's why they're choosing here. And we've equated that to a lot of the driving force between those 13 million annual visits that we do see here. And I really want to highlight again that final bullet point, hence why it's bolded, the 4.6% of the Vermont GDP, that we're only second in the nation to Hawaii, meaning that recreation is such an important piece here compared to how other states utilize their recreation. And it also says a lot when Vermont geographically is a small state compared to some of those larger states that have these opportunities, that we're still seeing such a harsh impact when we cannot have these trail networks being supported, because anytime any of them go down, that's going to hurt not just the recreation community, but the GDP overall. And finally here with the financial burdens that we wanted to highlight, we have obviously one-time financial burdens that happen. That'd be like the July floods that happened. And we estimated, this is an estimate, this is not an exact number, but it was very close to $5 million worth of damage from the July floods that hit our trail networks. That's from either just simple washouts or places that had to be closed because roadways could not get to them. I know in our network, we had out of 7 networks that had significant flood damage, 2 of them could not reopen last year. And that's a pretty difficult thing to have when people make their plans based on that. And I know working closely with Nick and the mountain bike groups, they had similar things. There was just a lot of work they had to go do for safety. We don't want people out there recreating in places that we haven't been able to assess and get out in front of, because you don't want that negative experience and have them go back, well, no, Vermont's not a great place to recreate. So the deferred maintenance, again, we see a lot of organizations talking about having to push projects off, upwards of $1 million in several of these organizations. I know Nick and the mountain bike groups did do a research study recently about that, with that $1 million number coming in. I believe it was 1.1 when you did it for yourself. And that also comes with that final bullet point. We're seeing prices of materials go up. We're having labor shortages. There's also the exponential rise around our issue is our trails coordinators required to have specific certifications around conservation, stewardship, environmental impact, because anytime he does any maintenance, not cutting new trails at all, but just talking maintenance, we have to make sure that we're not adding to erosion patterns, or if there are erosion patterns, they have to be changed. And then we have to bring in architects and all of that. And sometimes they're not available right away. So what seems like it could be a week-long fix takes 2.5 months to set up. So those are just some of the financial burdens we see on a long-term basis. We do hope we don't continue to see those one-time big hits such as the July issues, but that is what we have going on in our financial burden right now. And I'll be passing it over here to Nick.
Awesome. And that's probably a good place. Tom did an awesome job setting the context and sort of the background of brings us here today. If there are questions on any of that, it might be helpful, because then we just want to spend a few minutes talking about H467 specifically. And fortunately, we did have a chance to listen in on Becca. She did a wonderful job laying out the bill. Just to quickly look back to last session, wanted to touch on, we came and spoke to you about H467. That was a bill that combined 3 short form bills. There was a bill about the Green Mountain Recreation Fund, a bill about trail accessibility, and a bill for VORAC funding. We're going to talk in a moment why we have a new bill and why that bill addresses a lot of what feedback we heard. So just wanted to highlight the fact that we were in here to talk about that, and that, you know, we've moved on effectively. A couple other things, one of which you heard a lot about, Move Forward Together Vermont, and that process going on. That's a really important backdrop to what we're talking about today. And I also wanted to touch on Act 59, which is the path forward on 30 by 30. So over the next 18 months or 18 months ahead, there's this dedicated process that will develop an inventory of conserved lands and a plan too, on how we're going to conserve 30% of Vermont by 2030 and eventually 50 by 2050. So that conservation effort, we touched on the fact that public access recreation is a designated purpose for conservation in Vermont statute. So recreation is certainly a core part of what that effort's going to look like. So H673, why the new bill? And a couple of things I think were really important to highlight here. One is that a feedback we heard from the last session, and there were some excellent questions in the room here already, which is this quantifying the investment need. You know, how much is that you actually required for stewardship, for new projects? Where are the priorities? And we could not answer that question directly. We know how much. It's a lot. We all have needs, but the idea of stepping back, looking at what other states are doing, and understanding that this is where we actually need a thorough analysis and understanding of all the different pieces that Becca highlighted on, from stewardship to climate change to new opportunities. Climate resiliency, we had 200-year floods in the past 6 months. And I think that for all of us recalibrated our understanding of what we're going to need to invest in climate resiliency. So this is an opportunity to invest in the study that will help us understand what do we need for Vermont in 5 and 10 years, not merely to survive another 100-year storm, but to thrive, to ensure that our outdoor economy is not just resilient, but continues to deliver those benefits to Vermonters. And then also the Move Forward Together Vermont process, we see a great opportunity to really not just dovetail, but support the outcomes of that work. That's going to lay out a vision for recreation in Vermont, and along with an action plan to get there. And this study can really help sort of put together the pieces. What are the investment opportunities discrete for that, and what makes the most sense to invest in? That's also all that much more important when we talk about we're moving away from one-time federal funding to situations where much tighter belts, much less available funds, we need to be smart and strategic and thoughtful about where those investments are going to be made. And then the last piece is we talked a little bit last session about the value of the Vermont Trail System, and this bill provides an opportunity through those best management practices to invest in really the next generation, the next iteration upgrades to that Vermont Trail System. You've already heard about what's in the bill: recreation assessment, staff capacity for the Trails and Greenways Council, and work on best management practices. In terms of the economic impact study, you heard all about the different pieces here. The only thing I really wanted to touch on was sort of the value proposition, the perspective from the trail stewardship community. And the simplest piece is, if we're able to really foster and ensure that our outdoor recreation economy thrives, we need to understand it. And the great questions you asked were really getting at the questions we're keen to know, to make sure we do understand where and how outdoor recreation is benefiting our economy. The second piece around now is really the critical time to invest in those smart investments on climate resilience, as well as stewardship and other pieces across the board. So getting a chance to understand what is the return on those investments, what makes the most sense to put our limited resources into. And similarly, one of the things that was Tommy highlighted before, we all, even prior to the events of this past summer and just a few weeks ago, we all had backlogs in deferred maintenance and requirements, and that we're looking at these stewardship needs where if we had, as Tommy put it, $1 million, we knew exactly where we'd put it. So we already have existing backlogs. You pile on climate change on top of that, we really don't have time to waste in terms of understanding these investment opportunities. I'll bring up private landowners again, and this, the conversation has floated around: is there a way we can recognize private landowners who host public access trails? Should they receive a benefit, something like current use? This study is really a foundational piece to understand, well, what is, it's Becca pointed out in terms of land ownership, what is the value that those landowners are providing to the Vermont economy? And that is a critical stepping stone for them to take further steps in understanding what might that look like. So provides a really bedrock there. And then in general, I mentioned before, last session, the feedback from folks in this building, really understanding what is the need, and this study would support that ability to come up with a really well-informed response. From the capacity role, Becca nicely touched on sort of the roles that the VTGC plays and what this role would actually do. And the reality is that as trails have grown and as our impact on the Vermont's economy has grown, the role of the council has grown in lockstep with that. And we've been fortunate enough to have a part-time program manager that we went and recruited seed money for. We were able to get a grant through the VORC program. We knew we couldn't waste any time in terms of putting a professional person in place. You'll hear from Sharon on her work. So we've seen the value of that in action, which has been really critical. In terms of the value for us, the work that we do in terms of both communicating with, engaging with members, and really, to put a point on it, mobilizing the private trail stewardship community. We know if we think about anything from Move Forward Together Vermont to 30 by 30 to responding to climate change, we need to have a professional organization that can actively work with all the different trail stewardship organizations, their various members, and help mobilize us. And having Sharon in that role has been transformative over the past 6 months, and we're looking to continue to move towards that as a sustainable position. So again, it's a role that I think that we've attested for the need, but now we've also demonstrated the value of having a person in place. And the last one on BMPs, Becca touched on much of this already, but all of our organizations, member organizations, we have best management practices that we follow. This is not, as she put it, the Wild West. But this effort would really be instrumental in sort of distilling those down into a general, accessible, and applicable set of trail standards. So if we think about the local community organization, the landowner, who, sure, they're not part of the Vermont Trail System officially, but they have trails on their land. They like to welcome the public to use them. This would provide a clear set of practical principles that they can understand and apply to ensure that their trails are sustainable, low impact, community minded, those type of things. So this is a really keen opportunity. And we spent years talking with FPR and working with them on how we approach this to distill those BMPs down to sort of the most useful and accessible set for practitioners. So that the other piece on this front, which is useful to have, and Matt Williams from Catamount Trail will talk to you about it in a minute. We've already seen this sort of public-private partnership on BMPs emerge in the Vermont Backcountry Ski Handbook, incredibly successful. We can follow that as an example in terms of how do we think about working with FPR to jointly oversee and actually help from an objective, removed sense, kind of distill these down into some general best management practices. I'll try to be quick. I know you have a lot of folks who want to talk to. The only other thing I wanted to highlight, and then we're keen to have questions from folks. But first is that all the sponsors, some of whom are in the room here, which we're very grateful for, but a lot of support for this bill. And then also that we'll be in the, next Friday, we'll be here again, in the chamber, we're in the building for Vermont Outdoor Recreation Day, and hoping to see many of you then and have a chance to talk even more about all the things we love about outdoor recreation. But with that, I just would, let's pause and see if folks have questions.
I see Representative his hand up.
No, that's counting.
You're counting, okay. You did have a hand up, but you were counting. Well, we will take questions. I just want to do a time check. I want to throw in a little bit of a break here for the committee, but before we move to the next witnesses, and I know we've got a couple presentations that I think that we're still going to see too. But questions for Nick? For Tony?
You had really good ones for Becca.
I have a question, and maybe more for Becca, but thinking of those earlier slides of migration and then visitors, which we obviously do great in going to in the country. Is there tension between those? Because if it comes down to housing to some extent, you know, you've got like Airbnb on one side and sort of permanent housing. If you were attracted, like you probably could move here permanently. And so how does that conversation work itself out?
It's a really good question, because I think housing is an underlying problem across the board and cross-cutting in so many ways. I mean, I think that's part of, honestly, when we think about even the study and funding the different ways outdoor recreation contributes to both people moving here, those relocation, as well as visitation, because it's a balance. It's absolutely the stories Tommy shared about driving reason for relocation. But that puts pressure on permanent housing, and then similar to visitor, it also generates this need for Airbnb or temporary housing. So I think you're right to point that there's tension there. And then the flip side being that as an economic driver, it's one of those pieces too that we don't have a good answer to that. And part of one of the study and better understanding where and how these financials are flowing into Vermont's economy will help us better understand that. So I think it's an excellent tension to point out, but it's one that we're eager to learn, I think, to better understand.
It's exactly how I would answer, so thanks. But no, yeah, and I think part of the other piece too with looking at all that is with the study, not only does it, of course, look at those tensions and that, but I think it also helps us find that navigable solution going forward too, because it could also potentially, through that tension, highlight a new possibility or even other tensions we have to look at that we never even thought of. And from what I've seen in smaller versions of, economic impacts, it really does shed light on a lot more than sometimes we even think. So it could become quite a positive experience.
Thinking about the best management practices and the fact that there's some diversity in the different types of trails that your two organizations are involved with, and then hiking trails even more so. Is there enough consistency across the maintenance building of trails that you can come up with a set of best practices that apply to all of them?
It's a really good question. I'll take a stab and you can, but I think if you start at best management principles at the very top in terms of minimizing environmental impact, ensuring folks have a safe experience and one that's, respectful of their communities, those are universal. And as you drill down into specificity about the type of equipment you're using on a trail, you do eventually bifurcate. I need to accommodate an ATV versus a mountain bike versus hiking boots. You do absolutely get to this detailed level, but there's a point before you get there when you're still talking about, and it's between really practices and principles about anything from stream crossings to, junk landowners to, different elements of how you deal with water management out of the woods that are consistent enough. And the reality is that this would create essentially that level of uniformity, which does exist. And we really have, we have a good start and have done a lot of work to honestly draft what those look like. But then we still would direct folks to say, okay, you're building a mountain bike trail and ATV trail. Here's the detailed sort of more guidance on what that needs to look like and be. But there is a level at which there's consistency, mindful of winter, summer, things like that. But you do have to be responsible about how specific you go. Yeah.
Representative Wilson.
Do you have any trouble with horses?
Could you explain what you mean by trouble?
If they use the trails, I used to do a lot of horseback riding and I had a place to do it.
Mhm.
But some places, people just, they may just take off on one of your trails.
It's a good question. And Vermont Horse Council is one of our members, and we work a lot with them. that really kind of points to the trails for a purpose. You know, there are trails that mountain bikes don't belong on because of the nature of their construction, they're too tight, switch axes, things like that. Similar horse trails where you have sensitive, you know, they're not either durable or the nature of the soil and things like that. So one of the things, and I think it highlights how valuable the Vermont Trail and Greenways Council is for us to all work together with that understanding of everyone, different use types needs access. And how do we make sure that it's not, and that doesn't mean everything everywhere. And that's really important to say that there are areas where it's appropriate to go motorized, areas with
And
horses.
the only add to, I think that's also where those first parts where Nick talked about in the BMPs, sometimes it's also thinking about how do we, make signage or how do we get information also out to the public about, either a specific trail or specific use type. We always talk about, I live right off the LVRT and there's lots of signage about, hey, this is speed limits where you can go, can't go, stuff like that. So that also filters in. It's not, and I think with the Horse Council, I don't know if some of you remember, I used to be with Farm Bureau. And that was one of the big things too, always was, not only trail networks they can utilize, but then when they are there, how do they help make sure they can maintain? Because they had that same feeling that they felt they might have been doing some things that they wanted to help mitigate going forward. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick break. And then got Abby next if you want to be setting up. Great. All right. So let's come back at 2:25.